Hi there, I'm Hannah and I'm with you this morning for our next daily devotional. We're looking at the Creed and we're looking at the everlasting nature of God. We're going to read from Isaiah 40 verses 27 to 31. It says, "Why do you say, O Jacob, and complain, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." Such an amazing piece of scripture. It's full of God's promises, and we can take hold of these today. Isaiah was writing this piece of scripture at a time for the Israelites. They were God's people and they were promised by God an amazing land. But at this time in this writing, they are scattered across the nations. They're in exile and they are just questioning God. Where is he? Is he faithful to the promises that he's made for them? And can they trust in him? And Isaiah is just bringing them back to a place where he's telling them that God is everlasting. God can outlast these problems, and he wants to bring them up and have heaven's perspective down onto their situations and to give them hope. So to do this, Isaiah is looking at who God is, and he clearly says that God is an everlasting God. So I looked up other words to describe everlasting, and some of them were relentless, deathless, indestructible, eternal, ceaseless, and infinite. And I just think those are such amazing words that just describe the character of our God. He is so much bigger than we can even comprehend, and he goes on and on and on. He was there in the beginning and the middle and the end, and he is just infinite. He also talks about God's promises. God's promises are everlasting too, which I find so comforting. I think that, we've got God's promises in the Bible over us, and every single one of them God is faithful for. He cannot lie. So when he makes a promise, he will keep it. And if you've got prophecies over you where you feel God's really speaking to you, then hold on to them because they are everlasting. God just keeps his promises. He also mentions in this passage that God is creator, and that this just blows my mind because I'm amazed by space, and when I think of God and how everlasting he is, I think of like our tiny little planet in the vastness of space and all the stars that God just breathed, and all these stars were made, and the galaxies, they're infinite. They go on and on. We've not found an end to them. And God is just like that. He's made us and we're so tiny, but he is so infinite, and he goes on and on and on. And I just love that my hope and my trust is in the maker of the universe, who is so omnipotent. He has the ultimate power. So Isaiah is really trying to help the people, God's people, to realise that, and us today as God's people too, to just get a bit of a grasp of how awesome and amazing God is. And he's beyond our understanding. So there is a mystery to God which we're not meant to know. We cannot sort of understand God by how we understand humans, I think, is how I see it. And that there's an element of God that is mysterious, but that's okay because he isn't a human like we are. He is so much greater than our minds, and he can do so much more than we can ever imagine. So in this passage, there is quite a lot of reference to weariness, and I love the promises that come at the end, but that we who hope in the Lord, he will renew our strength and will soar on wings like eagles. Just this lovely image of us being lifted up above everything when we put our hope in God. He lifts us up out of our troubles and can help us see his perspective on things. I think that one time that stands out for me is a couple of years ago. I was poorly. I was in bed for about a week, I think, and I just felt like this poorliness, this illness would just go on and on, that it would be everlasting, and I got sort of wrapped up in the thought that it would never end. And my husband Paul came to me with a picture from God, and it was of a carriage clock that was on a mantelpiece, and sometimes they have inscriptions on them, and he said that he picked up the clock and looked at it, and underneath it said that my time was in God's hands. And that brought such a great comfort to me. I think that when you know God speaks, there's just a weight in it, isn't there? And he just came into the room at that point, and all of my worries and doubts and fears, they were put into heaven's perspective, and I was able to focus on how to see this time in my life, and I just could trust that God is everlasting, and that my time is in his hands, and that there is no better place for it to be. And trusting the everlasting God with my time just helped me to focus and brought me great comfort and freedom in that situation. Jesus in the Bible also comes to comfort and help the weary. Time after time we see stories of his compassion, and God is just such a compassionate God. He in the Old Testament, a child kills a giant in the story of David and Goliath through God's strength. A lady in the New Testament is healed of years of bleeding because she puts her hope in God. She puts her hope in Jesus, and she just reaches out to touch him, and she is healed. Jesus crossed boundaries and spoke to people that were lepers, so socially unclean people. He crossed boundaries and he comforted them. He comforted the blind and he healed people, and ultimately on his death he comforted even a thief on the cross and just gave strength to the weary and hope. And it says quite clearly, if we put our hope in the Lord, he will renew our strength. So I just want to encourage you, whatever situation you're in today, to put your hope in Jesus, to ask God to see through his perspective your problems, and just to help you to rise up above it. When I was researching this talk, I just had this song, The Everlasting God. It's a beautiful song written by Brendan Brown in my head, and I was humming it, and I looked it up on YouTube to play it, and I just encourage you to do it too after this, because it just speaks scripture, everything we're looking at here. And I found a backstory of why Brendan Brown wrote this song. And at the time, him and his wife were suffering with an illness. They were just very tired, and they just couldn't have the energy to get on with their jobs, and they were worship leaders. And he was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome and sent to live with his parents in South Africa. So it was a really difficult time for him and them. It wasn't the ideal thing, but he just had times when he just cried out to God. He was weary, like the young men feeling weary, and he cried out to God, and then he wrote this beautiful song about this scripture that we're looking at. And I just want to encourage you, if you're feeling weary today, just to lean into God and ask him to show you things through his perspective and to give you strength. We'll just close in prayer now. Oh, thank you so much, Lord, that you promise through your scripture that you're there for us. You are there, and you have compassion on the weary and those that need strength. And you promise to lift us up like wings on eagles. Help us to have your perspective, Lord. And would you just give us strength this day? Amen.